So thank you guys for tuning in. We would have been here about 30 seconds earlier, but I was doing my intro to nobody. We forgot to start, or I forgot to start the broadcast. So we're going to start again. So again, I'm Ruben Pruitt, and to the far right there is my man, Coach Corey Peterson. And in the middle is our special guest, Mr. Sean Preuss. Sean is an educator. He's actually one of our former professors who's helped us to get the monstrous, huge, maniacally large heads that we have. He just crushed it with, look at that shine. We just crushed it with all this knowledge that we can bring you guys the absolute best training that we possibly can. You guys know me and Corey. Our entire life is really dedicated to helping you guys become the best that you can be. We sought out Sean because Sean is amazing at what he knows, what he does, and especially with special populations. So real quick, before I cut you loose, Sean, he's been a personal trainer for 9 years more. He's an instructor on faculty at Bryan University. He is also going for his doctorate. Is that correct, Sean? In education and was that health and wellness?
Kinesiology.
Kinesiology, health and wellness kinesiology. It all has letters in it. and he's the author of the book, The Heart Healthy Lifestyle, the Prevention of Type 2 Diabetes. And he also has a blog out there. So I'm going to throw his blog link up there. So if you like what you hear today, you can follow him on his blog. And again, the purpose of this show is to bring you guys as much straightforward, clear, solid information as we possibly can. So with further ado,
if you can.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sean, and go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get right into it.
Gladly. First of all, Corey, Ruben, thanks for having me on Proper Reps. It's a pleasure to be here with you two.
Good to have you.
I believe you brought me on tonight to talk about special populations, which is my passion in exercise. I've been a professor for the past 4 to 5 years, mostly at Bryan University, as you mentioned, Ruben, and mainly as a personal trainer. I've worked with people who have various health conditions, are trying to have a risk of getting a certain disease or battling a health issue. Examples are I've worked with diabetics, people with osteoarthritis, people with lower back pain, people who have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and some people who have heart disease, who have had heart attacks in the past. Mainly what I do is I try to find sustainable ways for people to add exercise, to make lifestyle changes, to make dietary changes, so that they're not necessarily completely all overhauling their lives and they're just doing something completely different, just that they're making some small changes that are going to help them improve their whatever it is that they're battling, their blood pressure, their back pain, whatever it is. And also hopefully extending their lives while improving their quality of life, enabling them to be able to do all the things that they enjoy doing on a daily basis.
That's awesome. That's so very awesome, Sean. Corey, you got anything for him?
Not yet. Not really. All right. Just getting this rolling.
All right. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna kick it off. We're gonna start off talking about. We're gonna talking about diabetes, and I'm gonna ask you a few questions here. So if hopefully this shows up. So if you guys have been following Proper Reps for a little bit, we are not the most technically savvy people on the planet, so bear with us. So the questions should pop up on the screen.
I can pull it up on my phone and see if it works. If you want.
And wait, hang on. So let's see. Did it show up? Yeah, well, diabetes came up there. The question did not show up. Not the way I planned it, but okay. So what we're talking about diabetes today. So we're just gonna read the questions. So the first question for you, Sean, is what is diabetes exactly, and what is the difference between type 1 and type 2?
Well, before I get into that, let me just talk about what happens in a person who's not diabetic first. Then we can talk about how it differs with type 1 and type 2. For a person who doesn't have diabetes, what happens is we store our sugar in two places in our body, in our cells or in our blood. Now, when our blood sugar, we have a moderate amount of sugar in our blood. When it increases, our body, our pancreas will produce insulin to help get the sugar, the excess, out of our blood into our cells. You can think of insulin, it's a hormone. You can basically think of it as a key. And so what insulin does is it goes to the cells where we will take the sugar out of our blood, put it into our cells, except just like we can't necessarily get into our homes if the door is locked, sugar can't get into the cells because the cells have a door that's locked. So insulin is basically a key. It unlocks the door to the cell, and the excess sugar leaves our blood and goes into our cells. So that's what happens in a healthy person. We put some sugar in our blood, and we put the rest in our cells. In a person who's type 1 diabetic, and this is, if you know type 1 diabetic, generally speaking, prototypically, it's a child, it's an infant, a child, a teenager, and usually they have to inject insulin because they don't make the insulin. So the cells in the pancreas that make insulin, they just don't work. So therefore, for this person to live, they have to inject insulin into their body so that they can take the excess sugar out of their blood and move it into their cells. Type 2 is more so what happens typically later in life. This is when people, generally, they tend to be obese. It doesn't necessarily, they don't have to be obese, but this is when we don't necessarily have the healthiest lifestyle. We might sit a lot. We might not eat healthy. We might not exercise. And over time, after having some unhealthy habits, we develop diabetes. And this is the diabetes that could lead to people having amputations, could lead to them going blind, have heart disease. This is kind of when we don't have healthy lifestyles, we develop this a little bit later in life.
Okay. So awesome. So so now, how is, you talked about how, in a healthy person that, insulin helps unlock the door so sugar can be used and affect the body. So, but how does diabetes, is it connected with obesity? How is it that, because you always hear, people who are heavier have a higher tendency to be diabetic, and why is that?
Well, the people who are, diabetes is connected, type 2 diabetes is connected with obesity. And type 2 diabetes, by the way, this is, as I said, the lifestyle-based one that people tend to get in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. People who get type 2 diabetes generally tend to be obese because our lifestyle generally tends to lead to both these things. If we don't exercise, if we eat poorly, if we drink a lot of soda, if we sit a lot of hours a day, we're more likely to be obese. And if we have do those same things, we more likely are to develop type 2 diabetes. And as I said, type 2 diabetes is basically about 90% of diabetics. But you don't necessarily have to be one to be the other. You could be a diabetic and be lean. You could be obese but not have diabetes. But they generally tend to be found at the same case with most of the same people because they have a lot of the same causes. Okay,
awesome. Gotcha. So now, what about smoking and drinking? If we're on a diabetic or even if you're not diabetic, but especially for diabetics, do they really have an impact on the severity of diabetes, or is it really just kind of we know you shouldn't do it, but if you're doing it, whatever, just make sure you're doing something else to be better?
Well, it's interesting that you're asking. I didn't know a lot about this until recently, Ruben. And I looked at some research on this, and it tends to be that people who are smokers are usually about 2/3 more likely to develop diabetes over time than people who don't smoke at all. So basically, 2 out of every 3 people who smoke are more likely to get diabetes than non-smokers. And at first, I was like, okay, maybe this could be some just carryover. If just like people who smoke are probably more likely to not exercise, who are more likely to eat, more sugar, to not, to sit more hours of the day. But it's possible that people as smoking could cause insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is basically a fancy way of saying that the cells don't really let the sugar they don't really accept sugar from the blood. So as I said before, you basically have sugar in your blood and your cells. And when we have an excess of sugar in our blood, we put the excess in our cells, but sometimes the cells won't take them. It's basically like having the locked door and the cells won't unlock the door to take the sugar. And smoking might cause cells to be reluctant to take the sugar out of the blood. And if that's the case, sugar piles up in our blood, and eventually we have type 2 diabetes. Now, you asked about drinking, and this is really fascinating, actually. So the people who have the lowest risk of getting diabetes are people who drink moderately, not non-drinkers, not people who don't drink at all. Does that surprise you guys?
Actually, it does a little bit. It really does. So now, why is that, Sean?
So this is interesting. So people who drink about 1 or 2 drinks a day have a lower risk of diabetes than people who drink a lot, or people who don't drink at all. And the reason is, it seems like drinking can actually make the cells more willing to take excess sugar out of the blood, but only to a certain amount. It's like, this is kind of the case of the cliche of, I'm sure, like, I don't know about you guys, but my parents always said everything in moderation. My mom especially, everything in moderation, everything in moderation. Did you hear that from your parents growing up?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
Still do.
So this seems to be the case where this applies. Is if you drink in moderation, 1 or 2 drinks a day, it actually makes your cells more willing, more eager to take excess sugar out of the blood. But if you drink a ton a day, if you drink 3, 4, 10 drinks a day, you lose that benefit. So it's only that 1 or 2 drinks per day actually can be beneficial versus not drinking or binge drinking daily to prevent diabetes.
So would you, to just kind of expand on that, now if somebody already has diabetes, would you recommend having that same maybe 1 drink a day?
In terms of making the cells more eager to take on the insulin, yes. But it depends on what you're drinking. If you're drinking let's say a mixed drink where you're having like a pina colada, the sugar in the pina colada likely not only negates the benefit of the alcohol, but probably makes it much worse. But let's say you're drinking something where you're not getting a ton of sugar, maybe a vodka soda on the rocks.
Sure.
You're probably getting the benefit because there's essentially no sugar in that. So you're probably getting the benefit of the alcohol without the detriment of the sugar. So it depends. What are you drinking?
I'm not drink. I don't drink very often at all. But some of the questions leading that we're going to go into is my grandma was actually just recently diagnosed with type 1, and we'll get into that a little bit later with the questions. But she doesn't drink at all. But I also have my father-in-law who is also pre-diabetic. He drinks a little bit here and there. So he's going to be happy to hear that he can drink at least something. So anyway, moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So actually, I think we probably made half of our viewing audience jump for joy. The guilt-free.
Please keep drinking. By all means.
For God's sakes, don't stop. All right. So moving on. So the next question we have for you, Sean, is there's a lot of talk out there about ketogenic diets, and I've had some experience with them, and I'm kind of pro ketogenic. I believe Corey is pretty pro ketogenic. But the question comes into with diabetics when you start going into here, because once you're in that that full blown diabetic or even that pre-diabetic phase, you have to be a little more careful on your food choices, things like that, or so they say. Absolutely. So can you shed light on us onto your thoughts as far as the ketogenic diet towards people who are either pre-diabetic or full-blown diabetic?
So let's dive the ketogenic diet. We're basically talking about eating a majority of your calories from fat, second from protein, and then a small amount from carbohydrates. Correct?
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. So I'm just clarifying for anyone who's watching who's not sure what the ketogenic diet is. It's I think of it as a more strict low carb diet. Would you agree with that definition?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not a fan of backing any one specific diet for all people. I think and I hate saying this because it's such a cop-out answer where it depends on the person and different things work for different people. I do believe that even though it's this non-scientific, lazy answer, but with type 2 diabetics, I firmly believe a low carb or ketogenic diet is the best way to go for them to improve their condition. There's a ton of research to back this. For example, in one study, for every 10% that the diabetics reduce their carbohydrate intake, so 10%, let's say you eat 300 grams of carbs per day. This will go from 300, cut it by 10%, 10% 30, so you're going from 300 to 270 grams per day. In the study, they showed that 10% reduction in carbohydrates led to a 5% reduction of blood sugar. So
Wow.
that means if you consume 300 grams of carbs per day, and let's say you cut out 90 grams, that would be 30%. You'll decrease your blood sugar by about 15%, which is a pretty substantial change. The one way I can explain it best is to think of it this way: if you have a leak in your faucet or in your bathtub, if you have a leak in your faucet, let's say, the best way to treat it is just simply to cut off the water supply, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes
It's the same thing when you have your excess of blood sugar, which is the case with type 2 diabetics.
Mm-hmm.
A simple way to make it better is simply to cut off the supply of sugar of food sources that break down the sugar in the blood. You're basically just limiting the supply of sugar going into the blood. And sugar from our food basically comes from two things: protein and carbohydrates. Now, protein foods provide a much less amount of sugar into our blood. So the bigger cause is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates mostly break down the glucose. So the best way to go about it is simply to eat less carbohydrates, and then you're going to put less glucose into your blood, and your blood sugar will eventually decrease.
awesome.
Yeah.
Do you think
Awesome.
that will increase or decrease insulin sensitivity over the course of time?
It should. It actually will increase insulin sensitivity.
Okay.
And again, insulin sensitivity is simply the willingness of cells to take excess sugar out of the blood. We want to have more insulin sensitivity. The more we have, the more sugar cells will take sugar out of the blood, and it will help lower blood sugar.
Okay.
Very good.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. All right, so now going into talking about diabetics, another thing that we always hear about when we're talking about diabetics is we hear one verse we hear, you need to watch your glycemic index of food, and then we say, well, you know what, don't worry about that. You got to look at the glycemic load. Can you kind of help clarify the difference between the glycemic load and the glycemic index, and in which has a greater impact or diabetic health?
Sure. All right. So glycemic load and glycemic index, these two have become very popular in the last, I would say, like 15 years, when people are talking about diabetes prevention, and also some people use glycemic diets for weight loss. So glycemic index is simply if you ate the same amount of a food, like if you ate 100 grams of any food or 50 grams of certain food, how much of a blood sugar impact is that going to have? So, you might have a 55 for one food and a 25 for another food. So basically what it's saying is the food that's at a 25 will spike your blood sugar less than the food at 55 if you eat the same amount of carbohydrates. Now, a glycemic load is basically not the carbohydrates don't have to be equal. The glycemic load is the food you eat plus it's the amount of the food that you eat. So there's a glycemic index for, let's say, bananas, and then we'll also consider, do you eat 5 bananas or 2 bananas? So the glycemic load takes in the amount that you eat as well as the food that you eat, but the glycemic index is simply just the food that you eat, and it doesn't account for how much of that food that you eat.
Okay.
One thing I want to add to the glycemic index, though, and this is something, it's been shown to be helpful for diabetics. but it's not shown to be as helpful for diabetics as eating a low-carb diet. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not necessarily a low-carb diet advocate for all things, but it works really well for type 2 diabetics. The flaw of eating a glycemic index diet or following glycemic load is that it only accounts if you eat that one food at a time. But I don't know about you, Corey. I don't know about you, Ruben, but I generally don't eat just one food at a time. I eat like 3 foods, 4 foods, 5 foods at a time. Is that the
Yes.
case with you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
So a glycemic index doesn't account for that. If you eat bananas, but then you also eat, I don't know, some eggs, some bacon, the glycemic index doesn't account for all 3 of those foods combined. Or then you have a glass of orange juice. It just takes into each food individually. It's not really accommodating for all these foods together.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's very limiting in terms of that. So
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So now, well, so would you say one would be better than the other, as far as if you had someone who wants to pay attention to one of the two in their meal planning? Was there one that you would say you would have them lean more towards?
For diabetics, yes, low carb.
Yep.
But I couldn't say
as far as
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. As far as between between judging by the glycemic index or the glycemic load, if they're gonna pick foods based off of one of the two, which one do you think would be more beneficial, or would they kind of just throw that out and just find yourself a good low carb type setup?
If out of the glycemic load and glycemic index, I follow the glycemic load because, as I said, it's not just the food that you eat, but it's also the amount of the food that you eat. So I would follow the glycemic load over the glycemic index, but given a choice of those two plus low carb dieting, and this is again for blood sugar management for the regular for the non-diabetic, there's a lot of other factors that come into play that like what kind of foods do you like to eat, what's your goal. But for simply diabetics or people who are pre-diabetic or worried about diabetes, I'd go with low carb over glycemic load or glycemic index.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, so now, which brings us to our next question. Does exercise really have a positive effect on diabetes? Because you always hear, diabetics should get out there and exercise, move, lift weights, run, kill a slay a dragon, something like that. Does that really have any kind of, the slaying a dragon is at their own risk, by the way. But does that really have an effect on diabetes?
Well, let me just say, slaying dragons is actually a great form of high-intensity exercise. So I highly recommend it for everyone, diabetics or not.
And dragon meat is low in carbs, just so you know. Dragon meat is very low in carbs.
This is true. High in fat, high in protein, low in carbs. This is a good question because there's quite a few conditions that people that are common that are not that affected by exercise. Fortunately, diabetes is not one of them. Diabetes is actually, you can, if you're pre-diabetic or you don't have diabetes, you can, exercise can really, is very effective at helping you prevent diabetes. But if you're diabetic, exercise can actually be a great way to not only manage the condition, but prevent some of the long-term effects. For example, people who are diabetic, they're much more likely to get heart disease, they're much more likely to get a heart attack, they're much more likely to go blind, to have a limb amputated, they're much more likely to have a stroke, they're much more likely to die early, anywhere from about 4 to 10 years based on what study you look at. But if you exercise, you can actually manage your blood sugar, you can improve your insulin sensitivity and prevent all those awful things that I just mentioned from ever happening. Specifically, when it comes to diabetes, just about anything is beneficial. Walking, jogging, even just like low intensity exercises like that you just do for a long period of time, they can be very beneficial. They can help reduce blood pressure. They can increase insulin sensitivity, so helping the cells to get sugar out of the blood. But when it comes to what's the best bang for the buck, it's high effort exercise. So specifically what I'm saying is interval training, where you're really working hard for 30 seconds or a minute, and then you're kind of working at a lower effort level for a minute or two, and then kind of repeating those intervals. Or strength training with challenging weights. Those tend to be the best ways to not only improve your cell's ability to take sugar out of the blood, but to reduce your blood sugar. So it's strength training, it's interval training. Those are the best ways for diabetics to exercise.
Awesome. Now, what is it about the strength training, and this is kind of a little off the cuff there, but what is it about strength training that causes that benefit and for the diabetics?
Well, both those types of exercise, the interval training and the strength training, are high intensity. So as you know, you two both know very well that high intensity, high effort exercise requires sugar to be used for energy. So it will use not only some of the excess sugar in the blood, but also some of the sugar that we're storing in our cells. And as a result of using that sugar for energy, it will help lower our blood sugar and also take some of the excess sugar that we have and help it get into the cells. So it basically uses some of the excess sugar we have in our bodies to fuel the exercise. And that's something that the high effort exercise does that the low effort exercise doesn't really do.
Awesome. Does
that make sense?
Thank you. Yep.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So basically, just to kind of echo on what he's saying, when you do a high intensity exercise, you're going to be burning up more carbohydrates because it's a more quickly burning fuel versus a low intensity exercise, which is you don't need the carbs as quickly, so you're not going to use up as many of them as you would during a high intensity exercise.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And for the viewer, one easy way to think of this without thinking about, measuring your intensity level is simply when you're doing something that's high intensity, you're going to be out of breath. You won't be able to speak like I'm speaking now. You might only be able to say 3, 4, 5 words before taking a breath. If you're doing that, that means you're working at a high intensity level, and that's when you're probably using sugar for energy, and that's when you're really getting the benefit of the high effort exercise for controlling blood sugar.
Okay.
Nice.
Talk test.
Very, very good.
Yes, the talk
that all the time in sessions.
Awesome. All right. So so now here's a question that Corey was asking about earlier. What are the best exercise for a woman in her mid-70s who was recently diagnosed with diabetes? She's on insulin already, with 1 hip replacement and 2 knee replacements. How would you, if this is your client, how would you address that one?
Okay, so she's in her 70s. She was recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and she has a hip replacement and 2 knee replacements.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So my guess, based on past experience with clients in similar situations, is she probably doesn't have a long exercise history. Is that correct? Okay. No,
Zero exercise history.
Okay. So I'm going to say, of course, I'm going to see what she's going to be able to do after I get a doctor's note from her. I'm going to see, clearing her to exercise. I'm going to see what she's able to do through some assessments. I'd probably do some basic assessments with her, such as the 30-second chair stand. And for people who are interested, 30-second chair stand, it's exactly as it sounds. I'm going to see how many times she can completely stand from a chair in 30 seconds. I might have her do some balance tests where I'm going to have her stand on one foot, see how long she could stand on her right leg for, up to a minute long. Do the same thing on her left leg. I'm going to have maybe do a little strength test, and I'm going to try to put her on some basic things, like maybe have her, when she does the standing up from a chair, see if she's got range of motion in her hips and her knees, and see how those things turn out. So now that I've gone through all the cautionary the starting steps, my thought is, first of all, what is this woman looking to do? Let me ask you that.
Just try to do anything that she can to keep her sugar levels down. She's not really obese, but she does have a higher fat percentage than the normal person would. She's just looking to basically prolong her life a little bit longer so she doesn't have to live her golden age suffering through the effects, the negative effects of diabetes. So. Okay,
understandably. All right. So I would, my first thought is direct her towards strength training.
Okay.
I'd mostly put her on machines to start with, and I would focus on compound movement. So I'd focus on a machine chest press, a machine row, a machine pull down, a lat pull down, One single joint movement I would put her on is a leg curl. Leg curl tends to be the least stress on the knees, being that she's had 2 knee replacements. My experience is people with knee replacements, even if they didn't necessarily gain their full range of motion post-surgery, they still can do at least a limited range of motion leg curl. I'd also try to put her on, let's see, an overhead press or shoulder press, and a leg press. If she doesn't tolerate the leg press well, I might try a standing ball squat, where she's positioned against a stability ball, which is against, basically between her and the wall. And I would let her, kind of go down into the squat as far as she's comfortable with. The main thing overall, though, getting away from those exercises, just simply thinking about what can she do, what are her joints comfortable with, and working with a very low resistance and then slowly building up the resistance over time to the point where whatever is high intensity for her, we're going to work up to that point. Then the strength training is basically going to help her in a few ways. It's going to help her control her blood sugar, like we talked about previously. It's going to build up strength in her muscles that surround her joints, so that way her muscles will support her joints better. It's also going to improve her functional abilities. If she has stronger muscles, she's going to be able to walk better. She's going to be able to walk for longer periods of time, and she's going to be able to perform her basic daily living activities better because she's stronger and has the muscle ability to do so.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So that pretty much covers their questions about diabetes. And so, again, for those of you watching, I'll put his link to his blog back up onto the screen. So if you like what you're hearing today, you can feel free to follow Sean on his blog, where he gives a more in-depth and a lot of detail and how to manage your health, not just for a diabetic, for everybody. For people who don't want to wind up in that position. It's always good information. And for those who may already be there, this is a way that you can help manage your condition. Good to go. And I'll also be putting up the link to his book if you care to buy it. So going into exercise in older adults. So when we're going in here, as we age, we tend to hear, I know I hear it from some of my older clients and prospective clients, and, possibly I'm sure Corey does too, but, that after you get to a certain age, that it doesn't really matter because, they're X age or this age or that age, and I'm too old to get started now, and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So my first question to you, Sean, is there an age that is too old to begin a fitness and wellness regimen?
By the way, I've heard that many times as well. Have you heard that either from people who don't exercise or maybe people who are interested in hiring you? I imagine Ruben, Corey, you've heard this before yourself.
All the time.
Okay, yeah, same here.
All the time.
My oldest client in the past was 88 years old, and she was a woman who she was strength training weekly, twice weekly, but she was also painting her house and had small home renovation projects going on every week. And I swear, once she finished one project, she started on another one. But to answer your question, Ruben, the best way I can answer this is with a study that came out a couple of years ago. There's a study in Denmark, and it's the only study I've seen of this kind. There were 23 men and women, and they were all dependent. So they were all relying on somebody else to prepare their meals, to do their grocery shopping, to help them do other basic activities that they needed to do on a regular basis.
Okay.
The study did 3 months of strength training. So these are people between, I think it's 87 and 95 years old. The average age was 89 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. 3 months of strength training, and they used what the adults found to be heavy weights. They did 80% of a 1 rep max. So that's basically, for anyone who's not familiar with the 1 rep max test, this is basically the most weight that someone can lift basically 4, 5, or 6 times. So these were tough weights. These are not like, oh, I could do 15 of these and then, not get out of breath. These are like, I use my best effort to simply do 4 or 5 reps. At the end of the 3-month study, the adults gained 37% strength. 37%. Wow. meaning that they, if their max weight that they could lift was 100 pounds, at the end of the study, they were able to lift 137 pounds. Again, these are people in average age of 89. So they were able to increase their strength 37%, and their muscle size increased by 10%.
Wow.
Yes.
And this is in both males and females?
Males and females.
Wow.
That's
yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
89 years old on average, and the oldest person in the study, I think, actually was 97.
Wow. So that pretty much debunks the myth that after a certain age you don't get any gains from strength training or from fitness
Age
altogether.
Is not an excuse. Age is not an excuse.
But hey, if there's someone out there that's listening who's older than 97, then I have no idea if it works for you. But everyone who's 97 and younger, you're not too old to exercise.
All right. So we're gonna the next, you kind of answered the question for my second question about the strength training having an effect on any person over the age of 60. You kind of answered that one, so we're 5 by 5 there. So now, what's one of the greatest fears that I've come across with the older populations, especially when I worked in a nursing home, was that the fear of falling is like one of it's like almost crippling for them. It'd be like me being buried in a pit full of broccoli. So, dude, that's terror. That's terror for me. But it's a fear of falling. And so the question is, by doing that, they get afraid they're going to fall doing things. It keeps them from wanting to get into an exercise program because it's going to become physical. What is your thoughts on a regular fitness program for people who may have had a history of falls, or they just don't want to have a history of falls? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Ruben, I completely understand your fear of a plate of broccoli. When I was a kid, I think I might have been 10 years old. We had Brussels sprouts for dinner, and I swear, if any of my family see this, they're gonna know exactly where I'm going with the story. There's a plate of, I don't remember what we had. We had maybe a piece of meat and Brussels sprouts, and my father said, "Okay, once you finish all your food, you can leave the table." So this was at dinner at like 6 o'clock. So 6:30, 7 o'clock, still didn't finish my Brussels sprouts. 7:30, my dad's like, "Look, you have a half hour. You finish the Brussels sprouts, so you go to bed." I went to bed at 8 o'clock. Still to this day, I do not like Brussels sprouts. So
it's kind of an acquired taste with Brussels sprouts.
Yeah,
it is.
Nice, no thanks. Nice. Okay, to answer your question, I've seen this with a couple of my clients who were 65 plus. For example, I worked with a guy who had an inner ear problem, and he had poor balance, and he also had, due to a rare disease, had poor peripheral vision. So for him, he had a fear of falling, even just walking from exercise to exercise, not necessarily because of the exercises themselves. So there's a couple ways to work around this. One is for people who are working with trainers, they can use their trainers to help guide them through the facility. For example, the trainer could they could walk with like a hand on the trainer's shoulder to guide them from place to place. But as far as improving balance, there's exercise is very effective to improve balance. And there's a couple ways to go about this. One is balance training. Of course, balance training is shown to drastically decrease fall rate for older adults. I'm saying that it can decrease as much as help older adults fall about 50% less. Some simple ways to do this is simply to progress how you're doing your exercises. If you're doing them in a seated position, you can perform them in a standing position. If you already perform them in a standing position, try performing them on one leg. So maybe like an overhead press with dumbbells. You're doing this while seated, you progress to standing. And then maybe you're doing them standing, then you perform them on one leg. If you're on a solid surface, then maybe progress to standing on a soft surface, maybe like standing on an exercise mat, or standing on if your balance is very good, on a Bosu ball. Bosu ball is that kind of half circle, the blue half circle. Another way of doing this is simply you can perform an exercise with your eyes closed, and just doing these kind of simple things to make your exercises less stable. And of course, I recommend doing this with someone along with you. You don't want to do this on your own. Of course, there's the risk of falling while performing this. And this is something you want to gradually progress over time, not necessarily, you don't want to go from sitting to standing on one leg. That's like jumping 3 levels at one time. The other thing you can do is simply become stronger, strength train. Studies show if you have stronger legs, especially if you have stronger abdominal muscles, lower back muscles, you'll have better balance. Strength is an underlying component to balance. If you're stronger, you'll have more balance.
Awesome.
Fair enough.
Thank you. And then let's see. So I guess my next question is going to be, what advice would you have for someone over 65 who's never worked out, who wants to get fit, and they're going to start their journey? What would your take be on that? What advice would you have for them?
For someone who's starting out who hasn't exercised their whole lives, and I'm gonna generalize this a little bit more. What I find is a common misconception people have when they're starting, or concern that people have when they're starting to exercise, is they feel that they have to exercise most days of the week, 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 7 days a week, or they're not really going to get any benefit. Now, Corey, I see you're shaking your head. You've heard this before as well?
About every orientation or initial assessment that I go into, everybody's like, should I be working out 5 to 6 days a week? So,
and that is not the case whatsoever. This is something that people do when they are preparing for competitions, when they are athletes. Yes, it's necessary for those people, but for the regular person who's not training to be an athlete, who's simply trying to be healthy, or maybe look a little bit better naked, or live longer, they don't need to exercise 5, 6, 7 days a week. In fact, you could simply just do basic aerobic exercise, such as walking, jogging, cycling 3 days a week and get benefits. Mm-hmm. You can strength train 2 days a week and get benefits. You don't need to commit that much time to exercise. As little as a walk for 3 days a week, 20 to 30 minutes per walk, that'll give you benefits such as reducing your blood pressure, reducing your cholesterol. And as far as strength training, twice a week, 20 minutes of workout, that can make you stronger, help you gain muscle, maybe help you build stronger bones. It can give you all these different benefits. Help reduce your blood sugar, just simply 20 minutes twice a week. That's it. So my starting advice to people is don't feel like this is a full-time commitment. You can put in a little bit of time, a few days a week, and get benefits. If you do that, you hit those few days of training, and you feel you can commit more time, then commit more time. Add another day. Add an extra 10 minutes to your workout. But don't feel like you have to start off 5 days a week, an hour per workout. You don't need to do that much to obtain benefits of your health, for your health and for the way you look.
And you could even go a step further and say, even with like your nutrition, you don't need to dive head first into a pool of broccoli or Brussels sprouts, guys. I mean, you can gradually build that up to that. So I think that's what we're all on the same page. When in previous episodes we've talked about this exact same thing, and you said it pretty much word for word the way we did. It was just like, you don't have to dive in head first, going into 6 days a week, 7 days a week, 2-hour workouts every single day. You can really start out a little bit slower and see benefits from it, and then as you get comfortable with what you're doing, add in a little bit more of intensity, add in that extra day, or add in that extra healthy meal, or however it is you guys, whatever makes it more comfortable for you. Because at the end of the day, this is a lifestyle change. This is something that we all want to spread and share our expertise on and change lives, not only for like a 30-day plan. I mean, yeah, sure, a lot of people will hire a trainer, coach for 30 days, but we want it by the end of that 30 days. My goal, and I can probably speak for Ruben and Sean here, is that they want to have you educated to the best of their abilities to keep going past the time you decide to stop working with a trainer, or have the confidence to go out on your own without a trainer. That's kind of what we want here, is to show you guys that it takes time. You have to dedicate yourself to it, but at the same time, take it slow, because it's gonna be forever. So enjoy it while you make it the most enjoyable you can.
Corey, to add to what you're saying, something I noticed with the biggest clients I had, or let me say, the biggest success stories I had with clients, at least in terms of weight loss, in terms of diet changes, it was making 1 or 2 goals per week to make diet changes. It wasn't people who completely overhauled their program or their diet, and they were eating this way, and then all of a sudden next week they started a low carb diet or low fat diet or a ketogenic diet or paleo diet. It was they would eat how they're eating, and then next week they would make one change. They would, all of a sudden, let's say, start eating more omega-3 fatty acids, and then the following week they'd start eating 2 to 3 more servings of fruits and vegetables per day, and the following week then they started adding more protein. And it was that kind of step-by-step approach, incremental approach, that led to long-term changes, where after a few weeks, after a few months, they continued doing all those things that they slowly added to their lifestyle program, as opposed to simply I eat this way, and then because I'm starting a weight loss program, I completely change my eating habits, and now I'm eating that way.
Yeah, exactly. 1% better every day. That's all you should aim for. So,
well said.
Yeah.
That's right. All right, so we're coming up to the wrapping this up a little bit. So we're going to talk about behavior change. So one of the things that that I've come across with people is the excuse that they have a hard time sticking to a workout program. They have a hard time sticking to a nutrition plan. And so I was wondering if you could share some insight onto ways that they can help for someone who's just starting out on a plan. What can they do to put the ball in their court to make things a little more successful for them?
This goes back a little bit to what we were just talking about, but I don't feel a workout program or nutrition program has to be, it shouldn't be a fixed program. Like you start this program and you do the same thing and you continue that from week 1 to week, 32. I think successful programs generally tend to be adjusted week to week, month to month, especially on a monthly basis. So if you start a certain workout, and then after a few weeks, you might change a few of the exercises within the workout, or you add another exercise, or maybe you add in a few more sets. And the same thing with a aerobic exercise program. You might start up doing walking 3 times a week for 20 minutes, and then eventually you change it to 2 days of walking, 1 day of cycling. So I think kind of a frequent tweaking of the program, it can help you progress while also make it more entertaining. Because even though you can stick with the same things and have success, it makes it more kind of emotionally stimulating and make you want to stick to the program if you're switching things up. And the other thing I would just recommend is to periodically set new goals. You're going to work towards a certain set of goals, but after a little while, maybe you reach your fat loss goal. So maybe you set a higher fat loss goal. Or maybe after you reach your fat loss goal, then you start setting goals for strength. Or then you start setting goals for how much muscle you want to gain. Or maybe you want to get your blood sugar down to below 100 milligrams per deciliter in the morning. And you get there, and then all of a sudden, maybe you want to set a goal for your blood pressure, to get your blood pressure below 120/80. So it's periodically, you can keep the same goals, but maybe add on a new goal that's going to keep you motivated over time. Don't just stick with the same things. Don't just stick with the same goals. Don't just stick with the same plan.
Excellent.
Yep, exactly it. Branch out, explore new things, try new things.
Absolutely.
Keep it fresh, because if you focus on the same thing every time, you're going to get burnt out. Is basically what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in my example, when I went from 300 pounds down to 200 pounds, or 205, excuse me. I got burnt out a lot focusing strictly on the weight loss. That was all I focused on. But then as soon as I started working with my coach and a couple other people, I started branching out and trying new things. I got stuck at like 235 pounds for a long, long time. But then as soon as I stopped focusing on that and focused on Olympic weightlifting or Spartan races or whatever it was at that point in time, that's when I noticed my other goals, my weight loss goal, actually, I broke through the plateau. So make sure you can set up goals that help align you to what your end game wish is or goal is. So if you're wanting to lose weight, try focusing on strength training too. I mean, it's kind of what he's saying to me anyway.
Absolutely. And just one thing to add to what you're saying, Corey, when you were stuck at 235, you were probably still making progress. It just might have been not been in weight. And I'm not just saying body composition, but you were exercising frequently. Maybe your blood pressure was still going on. Maybe your waist circumference was decreasing, but you were gaining muscle, and that's why. And you were losing fat but gaining muscle, so that's why the scale wasn't changing. Maybe your strength was increasing. So you could be making progress in all these different ways, but if you didn't measure those different things and you only looked at your weight, you would think to yourself, well, damn, I'm this program's not working anymore, even though it is. You just have to look at the right measurements. And hence, yes. So, yes.
That's funny, Sean, because I think people think that exactly that their validation comes from that scale, or their validation comes from the other 45 pound plate that they put on the barbell. Where realistically, if I'm understanding correctly, the body can still be making adaptation, positive changes, but now you're at this certain stage where you think you're at a plateau. You're not really at a plateau. Your body's just adjusting something else over here to get you ready for the next level that it's preparing you for. Is that a good way of looking at that?
Yeah. Just saying that progress isn't linear. So
yes,
you don't just constantly lose weight on a consistent downward scale. I've lost 30 pounds and held it off. Corey's lost way more than that, but it's like kind of along the way you kind of hit these flat lines. But yes, it's like you're still making progress. It just might not be on the scale, and that's why, as you were saying, you can't just use a scale and make that the overall assessment of whether or not you're making progress. You have to look at many different things: your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your strength, your muscle mass, all these different things, and you'll see that you're probably making progress, just might not be consistently on the scale.
Excellent. Now, so if you do take that, and you go get your regular blood checks and all those things, so then that's another way that people can kind of see that they are doing well and stay motivated, because they can actually see a broader picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. And people can get blood tests as often as every 2 months and see the effects of their training.
Oh, excellent. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's very awesome. So now for our final question, and we're going to see if any questions that might be out there.
Sure.
Is what advice do you have for someone who's brand new to fitness? One day they woke up and they're like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to be like this anymore. I need to change. And I think everybody has had that feeling at some point in their life. But it's in the honeymoon phase. Everybody's gung ho, right? Because we got the New Year's coming up, and everybody's gonna make their New Year's resolution, and then reality slaps them in the face. What advice do you have for that person starting out to when that first real steep hill of comes at them? How can they stay driving forward?
I have 3 specific suggestions. One, we already talked about: start small. Again, you don't have to work out 5 days a week, 7 days a week. Work out 2 days a week. Work out 2 days a week, 3 days a week. That's fine. That you'll get benefit from that. The second thing is schedule your exercise. Treat it like going to the dentist. Treat it like when you hang out with your friends, and you might book your lunch with your friend on Saturday ahead of time. You don't just on Saturday at 11 o'clock, 11 a.m., you're just saying, I'm going to go to lunch with my friend. You probably are talking to that friend a couple days, a couple weeks at a time, and scheduling it. Treat the exercise the same way. I'm going to work out Tuesday at noon, and I'm going to work out Friday at noon. Put it in your planner or whatever it is that you schedule your life. Put it in there. Schedule your exercise. The third tip is if you find exercise or diet changes, whatever it is, to be a chore, seek social support. You can do this in one of two ways, at least that comes to mind for me. One is you find a workout buddy. And it doesn't have to be someone that you're necessarily working out with, but just someone that you go to the gym with. Maybe your workout partner, he or she goes off to do, I don't know, a class, and you go off to do strength training, but you go to the gym together, so at least you have an obligation to that person to go to the gym.
Yeah.
If you don't have a workout partner, find an accountability partner or accountability partners. This can come in the form of telling, and by the way, the more people, the better. Telling other people, I'm working out, I'm going to work out on Tuesdays and Fridays, and tell basically every freaking person that you know, tell your coworkers, tell your family, tell your kids, your spouse, tell people you come across frequently, your kids, whoever. You're working out now. You're gonna you're gonna get into cycling, and you're gonna go to the gym on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to do cycling. And ask them to check in on you and ask you on those days or the next day how it went, because when you know that they're gonna ask you, you're gonna feel like a jerk the next day if you didn't go, and you're gonna be like, "Yeah, I didn't go," and they're gonna be like, "What happened?" You're gonna be like, I just felt like going home and watching TV. And they're going to give you a hard time. And if you told 10 people, you're going to get a hard time from 10 people. Do you know how uncomfortable that is? Tell a bunch of people. Create accountability partners. And that's going to make you more motivated to go, simply because you just don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation with a bunch of people.
Yep.
That makes
To expand on that, don't pick people that aren't going to hold you accountable, though. So this isn't like there's a lot of good tools out there to do this with. You got Facebook groups, social media, stuff like that. Check into the gym. A lot of people will harp on you like, we don't want to know when you're working out, blah, 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 blah. Just ignore those guys. Especially me, I post countless videos of my lifts and stuff like that.
Yep.
But just find people that you know that will support you in your endeavors. So.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So that's everything. So I'm not sure we have any questions out there. If you do, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we'll answer them on the spot. But Sean, thank you so very, very much. I think you've been super informative and very insightful for us. And again, it's also always good to know that the stuff that Corey and I are not completely crazy in our thought processes. That we are on point. And because sometimes it does seem like the stuff that we echo, and it's and I consider myself blessed to have you as a friend and an acquaintance and a peer, and just like Corey, and Corey and I, we share a lot of the same thoughts and processes and in the belief in bettering people. So it's always really great to have somebody like you to help reinforce what we believe and keep our eyes open to things in ways that we can make other people better. So again, did we get a comment out there?
That was me.
Question. Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask, please. That's what we're here for. And again, like I said, feel free to go ahead and share this link. It's public. So you can just share it as many times as you want. There's no need to be on my quote unquote friends list to see this, or Corey's friends list to see this. It goes right out there. And get this out there, because there are people out there who may have questions that they want to ask but never felt comfortable to ask, and this information may help them. And like I said, we are going to do this right now. It's every other Tuesday that we hold this show. And again, I will put the original link for Sean's book was like monstrous, and it would be like really tiny letters on the screen. So I will just go ahead and say you can grab Sean's book, The Heart Healthy Lifestyle, from Amazon. Just the heart health lifestyle prevention and treatment of type 2 diabetes by Sean Preuss. Let me put his name up in the thingamajiggy here, so you guys can get this spelling correct. Oh, you know what? I can check this out. Let's see. Whoa, look at that.
Oh, dang.
It's the little successes that we use. So I'm telling you, Sean, our very first broadcast was absolutely comical because I kept getting cut off and kept getting blocked out. Then the second one, I want to say, one of us kept freezing. I think I might have kept freezing on that one. And then we got the first one here, and then Corey kept getting his Vogue pose on, and he just kind of freeze, and we could hear him fine. So it's been a work in progress, which made this whole thing absolutely enjoyable.
Absolutely.
But again, Sean Preuss, and also his book, or his blog. I'll put it back up on the screen. It's the Heart Healthy Lifestyle blog. www. See, Sean, you're not the only one that does that. THHLblog.com.
So, in case the viewers are curious, thank you for putting that on the screen, Ruben. I put my email address and my blog address in the chat box in case anyone wants to email me with questions or they want to look at articles. The blog is free. There are articles on things ranging from exercising to improve your health, to improve your longevity, to weight loss. And it's all based on research. It's not my opinion. It's based on studies I've read. A lot of it comes from my book, but a lot of it comes from other things I've read. And I'll just to go back to something you said a few minutes ago, Ruben. It's a pleasure to be on Proper Reps with you and Corey. I'm a fan of what you guys are doing. The show is great. I've seen your social media content. You guys are doing great. It's a pleasure to be colleagues with both of you. And thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So if we don't have any questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you guys very, very much. We were on, this is Proper Reps with Corey and Ruben with our special guest, Sean Preuss, fantastic guy. And again, feel free to go ahead and share this broadcast even after it's over. We will, in the future, we're going to have a YouTube channel set up. And we're going to be putting out exercise videos, all kinds of crazy things, just to give you guys as much valuable content as we could possibly muster for y'all. So again, thank you guys very much. Corey, you got anything for him?
No, that's it, man. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you all very much. Y'all have a great one. Sean, thank you so much, Sean.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a good day.